My name is Riley Bennett. I am 27 years old, and I used to believe the worst thing my parents could do was disapprove of my choices and call it love. I grew up in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, in a house where the lawn was trimmed like a magazine cover and every family photo was a performance. My parents, Diane and Mark Bennett, were the kind of couple neighbors described with the same three words every time: reliable, generous, family first. They ran the PTA, hosted charity auctions, and volunteered at church. They remembered birthdays in public and weaponized them in private. If you met them once, you would assume I was lucky. If you lived inside their version of love, you would learn the true rule: approval was rented, not given, and the rent was obedience. In our house, disagreement was treated like a defect. I learned early how to shrink my feelings into something polite. If I wanted to spend the night at a friend's house, my mother needed the friend's last name, address, parents' jobs, and a list of promises. If I wanted to join an art club instead of student council, my father framed it as wasting potential. They rarely yelled. They did something worse. They narrated my life to other people in ways that made me sound fragile, impulsive, and in need of guidance. By the time I left for college, I had a second self living in the minds of relatives, the version my parents curated. Riley, sweet but easily led. Riley, bright but unrealistic. Riley, who needed saving from her own decisions. After graduation, I moved to Cleveland for a marketing job. The distance gave me air. I paid my own rent, bought my own groceries, and made friends who did not need my parents' permission to know me. My parents reacted like I had moved to another planet. My mother called daily and left messages with warmth that always carried a hook. She wanted details, names, schedules, and updates she could retell. My father offered career advice that sounded supportive, until I noticed he never asked what I wanted, only what looked respectable. I lasted 3 years in that in between space where I was technically an adult, but still treated like a child who could be reclaimed with the right pressure. Then I met Ethan Porter. It happened at a charity 5K my office sponsored. Ethan was volunteering at the water table in a faded hoodie, handing cups to strangers like it was the most normal thing in the world. We started talking because he laughed at the same ridiculous team name I did, and we kept talking because he was steady. Not flashy, not performative, steady. He worked in cybersecurity at a mid-sized firm. He had the calm focus of someone who solves problems for a living and does not need to win rooms to feel important. With Ethan, I felt something I had been missing for years. I felt like my life belonged to me. 2 years later, he proposed on a quiet Saturday in our kitchen. No restaurant, no crowd, no photographer hiding in the corner. Just coffee, early sunlight, and a ring he had chosen with more thought than sparkle. Yes, and for a few hours, I let myself believe my parents would be happy, genuinely happy. I still had that old reflex, the one they trained into me. If I make the right choice, maybe this time I will finally earn the version of love that feels safe. I called them that afternoon. I sent the ring photo. I waited for joy. What I got was assessment. My mother congratulated me and immediately shifted to questions that sounded casual but were not. She wanted Ethan's full name again, his birth city, and his job title. My father's voice came on the line with forced warmth and asked about Ethan's family background, education, and long-term plan. It sounded less like celebration and more like an interview. I answered politely, then ended the call feeling unsettled. That night, Ethan noticed my silence and asked what was wrong. My parents had questions. He nodded once, as if he had already predicted it, and told me he could handle questions. Neither of us understood that questions were not their goal. Control was. The first public meeting between Ethan and my parents happened the next month at my Aunt Marisol's birthday dinner. My parents arrived late, smiling as if they owned the timing. My mother hugged me tightly, then held me at arm's length and inspected my face like she was checking for damage. My father shook Ethan's hand and squeezed a little too long. They were charming, complimenting Ethan's job and asking about his childhood. And underneath that charm, they tested boundaries. They pushed Columbus as a future home and treated Cleveland like a temporary mistake. They framed everything as concern, which made refusing them feel like refusing love. On the drive home, Ethan pointed out something I had normalized. My parents did not talk with him. They talked around him. They talked to him like he was an employee applying for a role. He also noticed my father asked about Ethan's access to sensitive systems at work, and my mother asked whether Ethan had ever moved a girlfriend away from her family before. It was not curiosity. It was groundwork. My parents were collecting angles. The first sabotage attempt arrived as an email forwarded to me by my mother. The subject line sounded harmless, just something she stumbled on. The email contained a screenshot from what looked like a county court portal. It showed Ethan's name. It showed the words protection order. My stomach dropped before my brain could catch up. Underneath, my mother wrote in her softest tone, the one she uses when she wants to plant fear while sounding tender. She wanted to know whether I was sure I knew who I was marrying. I sent the screenshot to Ethan. He studied it for less than a minute and pointed out details I would not have noticed. The font was wrong. The county name was misspelled. The case number format was inconsistent. He pulled up the real county portal and searched his name in front of me. Nothing. No filings, no history, no record. It was a fake. A sloppy fake, but effective if you want someone to panic. Ethan's voice stayed calm, but I heard the edge under it. He understood what happens when a lie becomes a document. My mother, where she got it. She mentioned a friend, then avoided naming the friend. When I pressed, she shifted into offense and implied I was attacking her for caring. My father sent a message about respect and gratitude. The familiar childhood pattern snapped into place. Question the source. Become the villain. Ethan suggested something that felt boring and brilliant. Document everything. Track the lie as an object. Where did it come from? Who touched it? When did it appear? Do not fight the lie with feelings. Outlast it with facts. Over the next 3 weeks, the lies multiplied like mold. A cousin texted a rumor that Ethan had been fired for misconduct. A church acquaintance messaged with a prayerful note about trusting red flags. My father arranged a lunch with Ethan and returned from it later claiming Ethan seemed defensive and secretive. At the same time, my workplace received an anonymous email implying my engagement was distracting me and suggesting I might be unsafe at home. The email used therapy language and made my blood run cold because it sounded like a template, something copied from an awareness brochure and repurposed as a weapon. The timing was not random. Each spike arrived right after Ethan and I made a decision without my parents. When we booked a venue in Cleveland, a rumor appeared that Ethan had financial problems. When we decided to keep the guest list small, an unknown number texted that Ethan was isolating me. When we told my parents we were not moving back to Columbus, another anonymous message hit my work inbox, describing Ethan as controlling and dangerous. Every boundary triggered a new attempt to loosen it. I started a folder on my laptop named Vendor Receipts. Inside, I stored screenshots of rumors, forwarded emails, voicemail transcriptions, and the metadata of anything that arrived digitally. Ethan helped me collect email headers, timestamps, and patterns in phrasing. It felt surreal, building an evidence file about my own parents, while still receiving heart emojis from my mother. The strongest feeling I had was not sadness. It was a slow, steady anger at how professionally they were doing this. My parents were not improvising. They were running a playbook. Then a direct message arrived from an account claiming to be a woman Ethan had dated years ago. It described him as manipulative, secretive, and unsafe. It included a photo of a bruised arm with a caption that implied it came from him. The photo made my stomach flip, not because I believed it, but because I understood the design. It was meant to contaminate my mind with an image. Ethan ran a reverse image search and found the same photo on an old awareness blog post from years earlier. The account had stolen it. The profile had been created days before. Its followers were mostly local church women, and one account tied to my mother's nonprofit page. That was the moment my confusion turned into clarity. This was not protection. This was sabotage dressed as virtue. My parents were borrowing the language of real harm to weaponize it. They were using fear as a tool. I felt rage strong enough to steady me. I also felt grief because a part of me still wanted to believe they would never go that far. They went that far easily. I requested a meeting in a public place, a diner near my apartment, mid-afternoon, cameras visible. Ethan came with me, not to argue, but to prevent my parents from rewriting the conversation later. My mother arrived dressed like she was going to church, smiling like she was arriving at a celebration. My father arrived with his calm authority, the tone he uses when he wants to sound reasonable. I put the fake court screenshot, the reverse image result, and the follower connection on the table. I watched their faces. What I saw was not surprise. It was calculation. My mother acted confused. My father questioned how I obtained the information, as if the problem was my possession of it, not their involvement. My mother pivoted into wounded innocence. My father pivoted into paternal instruction. They framed Ethan as an influence, as if I could not reach conclusions on my own. Then they made their real move. They suggested counseling, mediation, a family meeting with our pastor, anything that would put them back in a position of authority. They were not trying to solve a conflict. They were trying to relocate the conflict onto their territory. That night, Ethan treated the situation like a security incident. He built a timeline, mapped rumor sources, and used stylometric analysis, comparing phrasing patterns across anonymous messages. The results were not perfect fingerprints, but they were consistent with my parents' habits. My mother's writing leaned into moral language and soft threats. My father's writing leaned into managerial vocabulary and certainty. The anonymous messages carried both. Ethan also warned me that sabotage campaigns often escalate near major milestones. If my parents wanted maximum effect, they would aim for the rehearsal dinner. My parents became unusually involved as that dinner approached. They offered to pay, to print programs, to manage transportation, to handle invitations for people I had not included. The generosity felt like a trap with a ribbon on it. I declined and kept control of logistics. My mother responded with performative hurt. My father responded with thin politeness. Then they shifted tactics again and attempted to isolate Ethan and me through separate conversations. My father invited Ethan to a weekend golf outing, even though Ethan does not play golf. Ethan went anyway to see what my father would try. Ethan returned looking tired rather than angry, and explained that my father spent hours implying I was unstable, implying I would ruin Ethan's life, and offering Ethan a graceful exit. My father framed it as advice from one man to another. He also implied that if Ethan walked away, my parents would help him avoid consequences. It sounded like a promise and a threat at the same time. My mother attempted her version of the same pressure with me. She invited me to lunch alone and used therapy language to describe Ethan as unsafe. She described stories about women who married the wrong man and ended up trapped. She watched my face for fear. When fear did not appear, she switched to nostalgia. She talked about me as a little girl, about how close we used to be, about how I used to trust her. It was emotional blackmail dressed as memory. 2 days after that lunch, a package arrived at my apartment addressed to Ethan. Inside was a flash drive labeled evidence. No return address, no note. Ethan did not plug it in. He placed it in a sealed bag and took it to a friend who worked in digital forensics. The friend examined it safely. The drive contained staged photos and documents designed to make Ethan look unfaithful and dangerous. A fake dating app profile, fabricated text threads, a hotel receipt, and screenshots of messages that did not match any real devices. The metadata showed most files were created within the last 48 hours. The hotel receipt used an old logo the hotel discontinued years ago. It was a prop kit. Hidden inside was something worse, a draft email addressed to my employer, Ethan's employer, our venue coordinator, and a list of relatives. The subject line read like an emergency warning about safety. The body framed Ethan as dangerous, framed me as trapped, and urged recipients to intervene by canceling the wedding. It was formatted to be sent quickly with the flash drive as proof. Whoever built it had planned to detonate it at the moment it would force panic decisions. One reason the sabotage cut so deep was that it was not the first time I watched my parents treat love like leverage. I have an older brother, Lucas, who left for the Navy at 18 and never truly came back. In family stories, Lucas is described as independent and stubborn, the son who always did things his own way. In private, Lucas once told me he left because our parents wanted a life-shaped son, not a real one. When Lucas came home on leave years ago with a girlfriend named Tessa, my parents praised her to her face and undermined her behind her back. Tessa, that Lucas was reckless with money. Lucas, that Tessa was looking for stability, not love. Lucas and Tessa broke up within a year, and Lucas later admitted he never knew why the relationship started feeling poisoned until he saw my parents repeating the same tactics with Ethan. Lucas became the first person in my family to tell me a sentence that changed how I understood my childhood. My parents do not argue, they campaign. I hired a therapist during those weeks, not because I doubted myself, but because I needed a place where my parents could not rewrite the room. The therapist did not diagnose my parents from a distance. She did something simpler. She helped me name patterns and practice boundaries without apologizing for them. She also helped me recognize the physical way my body reacted to my parents' involvement: tight chest, shallow breathing, the old instinct to explain myself until they were satisfied. The moment I stopped explaining, the panic softened. That was the first real sign of freedom. At that point, Ethan's forensics friend suggested a controlled disclosure. If my parents intended to spread fabricated scandal at the rehearsal, we could force the sabotage into the light under conditions we controlled, with witnesses and documentation. We hired a private investigator named Nadia Flores. Nadia specialized in corporate fraud and harassment cases. She spoke like a person who has watched polite people do ugly things. She interviewed the cousin who forwarded rumors. She interviewed the church acquaintance who messaged me. She traced anonymous email infrastructure as far as she legally could. She pulled security footage from a print shop where flyers had been printed and obtained a receipt used for one order. The name on the receipt was not my parents'. It was the name of my father's assistant at the hospital network. The assistant's involvement was the first major twist. My parents were not only lying, they were recruiting. My father's assistant had access to systems and records. My father worked in operations. My mother ran a nonprofit with a volunteer database. Together, they had a network of people who trusted them and would do tasks without asking too many questions. The sabotage was not a couple's whim. It was a small operation disguised as a moral mission. Nadia uncovered an even bigger twist: a private email thread my mother started with a subject line that looked gentle, almost sweet. Family Protection Team. The thread included church friends, two of my mother's cousins, and my father's assistant. The messages used soft language about praying for me, guiding me, protecting me from mistakes. But the tasks were concrete: monitor my posts, contact my workplace if needed, and be ready to support a narrative if the wedding had to be stopped. My parents had built a chorus, and they assigned roles like a director. The thread contained a line from my father that made my skin go cold: "Keep everything quiet until the rehearsal. That is when emotions run high and people act fast." He planned to exploit chaos. He counted on the fact that a scandal right before a wedding forces quick decisions, and quick decisions favor whoever controls the story. That one sentence turned my fear into focus. After the flash drive appeared, the campaign shifted into a colder phase. A wellness check was called to my apartment one evening while Ethan was at the grocery store. Two officers stood at my door, polite and serious, explaining they received a report that I might be in danger. The report described a controlling partner, isolation, and fear. It used the same therapy words my mother loved. I stayed calm, showed the officers the evidence folder, and provided my attorney's contact. The officers left respectfully, and one of them quietly advised me to keep documentation close. The wellness check did not frighten me. It confirmed the plan. My parents were trying to turn my own safety systems into cages. A week later, the venue called to confirm I still planned to proceed with my contract. Someone had called pretending to be me and asked about cancellation fees. The caller used my full name and enough personal details to sound convincing. The venue coordinator flagged it because my prior warning had been in place. Nadia traced the spoofed number to a prepaid device purchased at a big box store in Columbus. Security footage showed my father's assistant buying two prepaid phones. One passed to my father outside the frame. Recruiting had moved from moral support to logistics. My mother's favorite tactic was social pressure, so she tried to build a moral narrative around the sabotage. A church group leader called with a gentle voice and offered prayer, then guided the conversation toward whether Ethan controlled my finances, controlled my schedule, controlled my emotions. I recognized the questions as a script and ended the call. Within an hour, more calls arrived from different people, different voices, same questions, same phrasing, like a choir reading from the same sheet music. That night, Nadia captured another message from the thread discussing who would call which number and which tone might work best. My mother had assigned roles. Ethan and I built our own protections in response. We tightened privacy settings and locked down accounts. We used passwords with every vendor. We created a simple rule: no vendor changes over the phone without a code word. We informed close friends that any alarming story about Ethan would be verified directly with us, not passed along. It felt like building a security perimeter around something that should have been joyful, and it made me angry that I had to do it at all. But it also made me proud, because the perimeter belonged to me. Lucas called from a base in Virginia after I explained what was happening. He did not offer platitudes. He offered relief. Me, he had waited a decade for someone in the family to name the behavior. He also told me something I had never known. Years earlier, our parents attempted to contact his commanding officer with concerns about his stability when he refused to come home for holidays. The attempt failed because the officer saw it for what it was, but the intent was the same. My parents did not just want closeness, they wanted authority. With enough proof in hand, we prepared for the rehearsal dinner and also set a decoy. We created a fake rehearsal seating chart and sent it to my mother, explaining it was preliminary. The chart included two extra names that did not exist, placed carefully like bright markers on a map. 48 hours later, those fake names appeared in an anonymous email sent to my Aunt Marisol as supposed credible witnesses. That was confirmation. My mother was feeding information into the smear machine, and the machine was active. We warned our venue coordinator and provided Nadia's contact. We gave Ethan's HR a short heads up about possible impersonation attempts. My own HR received a similar notice, framed not as gossip, but as a security precaution. We told a handful of relatives we trusted, including Aunt Marisol and my cousin Ivy. We did not tell my parents anything. We let them believe their plan would land cleanly. The rehearsal dinner took place in a private room of a restaurant near the venue. Soft lights, white tablecloths, familiar faces. The calm before vows. My mother arrived wearing pearls and a smile that looked practiced in the car mirror. My father arrived with a toast ready. I noticed my father's assistant enter and sit near the back. I noticed two churchwomen I did not invite. Nadia was already in the room, seated at the bar with a clear view. The air felt normal enough for guests and tense enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Midway through dinner, my father stood and tapped his glass. The room quieted. He began with a speech about family and commitment and how marriage must be built on truth. Then he shifted into a story about a father's duty to protect his daughter. He held up a flash drive like it was a sacred object and implied he discovered something troubling. He suggested the wedding should pause until everyone felt confident. In that moment, the room became exactly what he wanted, uncertain and hungry for clarity. Ethan stood calmly and held up a single page, the forensic summary and chain of custody log, showing the flash drive's file creation times and the inconsistencies that proved fabrication. He explained, in plain terms, how easy it is to create fake screenshots and staged receipts. He kept his tone steady and respectful, which made my father's dramatic framing look manipulative. Ethan then posed a question to the room, not as an accusation, but as a puzzle. Who benefits from this appearing now? Who gains control by creating panic at the last possible minute? I held up Nadia's printed summary and read one line slowly, so it could not be dismissed as misunderstanding. Keep everything quiet until the rehearsal. That is when emotions run high and people act fast. The room shifted. The moment stopped being about Ethan and became about strategy. People are willing to believe many things about strangers. They are less willing to believe their own family planned a trap. And yet the line was there in black and white. Aunt Marisol asked for the rest of the thread. Nadia provided sealed envelopes for anyone who wanted to read more. My mother attempted tears. My father attempted righteous outrage. Neither landed the way they expected. Then the restaurant manager entered with a reservation log. The two church women were not invited. Their reservation was made using my mother's nonprofit account. The manager confirmed it quietly. A few guests looked at my mother like they were seeing her for the first time. The final twist arrived from my father's assistant. She stood pale and admitted she helped print materials and draft messages because my father framed it as a family intervention to protect me. She admitted she never verified the claims and felt pressured because he was her supervisor. Her confession turned suspicion into proof that my parents recruited help. The room was no longer an audience. It was a group of witnesses. I stated one boundary clearly. The wedding would continue, and my parents were no longer welcome at any events. I also stated the reason the police were not being called that night. I wanted the focus on my marriage, not their spectacle. Then I added one sentence my parents understood better than emotion. The truth would be shared with anyone who asked why they were absent. No alternative story would be allowed to grow. The restaurant manager asked my parents to leave. Nadia stood near the door, not threatening, simply present. My parents walked out together, and the hallway light caught my mother's face long enough for me to see the real emotion under the polish. Rage at losing control. Not heartbreak, not concern. Loss of leverage. That should have been the end. It was not. People who lose control do not always retreat. Some retaliate. The next morning, the draft email from the flash drive was sent anyway. Not from my father's address, but from a spoofed address that looked like Ethan's employer. It landed in my workplace inbox, the venue's inbox, and several relatives' inboxes. It attached fabricated screenshots and framed Ethan as dangerous and me as trapped. Ethan's company security traced the spoofed email path. The originating network was a guest Wi-Fi at a hotel lounge near Columbus. Nadia obtained lobby camera footage and identified my parents entering that lounge the night after the rehearsal, laptops in hand. This time, there was no assistant to blame. It was their own hand. That evidence moved everything into legal territory. Our attorney filed for a protective order. We included the group thread, the forged documents, the spoofed email trace, the decoy test, the witness statements, and the footage. My employer documented the harassment. Ethan's employer documented impersonation and reputational attack. The venue flagged the event with security. The record my parents tried to manufacture against us became a record against them. My parents attempted a new narrative. Church friends I had been manipulated. Relatives Ethan was controlling. They claimed they were victims of a smear campaign. A few people believed them because my parents were skilled at sounding wounded. But the people who mattered had seen the evidence. My Aunt Marisol refused to carry their story for them and stopped answering their calls. After the rehearsal dinner, a strange quiet settled over the group of guests who stayed. People did not know where to put their eyes. Some looked at Ethan with new respect. Some looked at me with sympathy, finally understanding that my family dynamic was not normal. A few looked guilty because they had repeated my parents' warnings earlier without verifying anything. Aunt Marisol handled that quiet with a kind of practical grace. She thanked everyone for coming, told them the evening was about support, and suggested we finish dinner. Normal food in the middle of abnormal behavior did something important. It reminded everyone that my parents' theatrics were not the center of reality unless we allowed them to be. Later that night, Ethan and I sat in our living room surrounded by paper. Vendor contracts, witness statements, printed emails, and Nadia's neatly labeled evidence packets. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. Tired in a way that lived in my bones, like childhood fatigue resurfacing. Ethan did not try to talk me out of it. He simply made tea, sat beside me, and stayed steady. He reminded me that winning a confrontation is not the same as healing. He also reminded me that the purpose of documentation is not revenge, it is protection. That one word, protection, belonged to us now, not to my parents. The next day, I called Lucas again. I expected him to sound distant the way he usually did. Instead, he sounded immediate, like my story pulled him back into the family in a way he never wanted. Me, he wished he had warned me sooner, and him he had warned me in every way he could, by leaving. Lucas gave me advice that felt like it came from someone who had learned it the hard way. Tell the truth to the right people before your parents tell their version to everyone else. He was right. Silence leaves space, and my parents love empty space because they can fill it with their narrative. So Ethan and I wrote a short message to our closest guests and a few relatives. It was factual, not dramatic. It explained that there had been a coordinated harassment attempt and that we had documentation. It asked people not to engage with rumors and to forward anything suspicious directly to us. The response surprised me. People did not demand details the way gossip thrives on. Most simply replied with support. A couple of cousins apologized for repeating concerns earlier. One of my childhood friends admitted she had always been intimidated by my mother and never knew how to stand up to her. That honesty mattered more than any public apology, because it meant my parents' power was shrinking in the only place it truly lives: other people's silence. 2 days before the wedding, my father tried a quieter tactic. He sent Ethan an email from his personal account with a calm subject line about meeting privately. The message framed everything as a misunderstanding and suggested a compromise: a longer engagement, counseling through the church, and a move back toward Columbus after marriage. Buried in the message was an offer to help with a down payment on a house, positioned as a gift. Ethan forwarded it to our attorney without replying. I recognized it for what it was: a bribe shaped like love. My parents had always offered help only when it bought access. My mother tried her own quiet tactic by appearing at my dress fitting. She had learned the appointment time through a family friend and arrived with a bouquet and the soft smile she used when she wanted to look safe. The boutique manager, already warned by my security code word system, asked for my confirmation before allowing her near the fitting room. I refused. The manager stayed firm. My mother stood in the lobby with tears in an audience, hoping shame would pull me back into compliance. It did not. I left through the back entrance with my maid of honor and sat in the car shaking, not from fear of my mother, but from the grief of seeing how willing she was to manufacture scenes. On the morning of the wedding rehearsal at the venue, our coordinator walked me through the security plan. It felt surreal, discussing entry lists and staff instructions, like we were preparing for a high-profile event. But the plan was simple and gentle. Only named guests were allowed. No one was permitted to approach me alone, and any calls about changes to vendors required our code word. The coordinator also told me she had received another call pretending to be me, asking whether my parents could be added back. She recognized the voice did not match mine and ended the call. Hearing that did not make me panic. It made me grateful for every boring precaution we had put in place. When the protective order hearing happened, one thing surprised me more than the judge's firmness. It was how my parents behaved when they could not control the room. My father tried to speak in polished paragraphs. The judge interrupted with direct questions. My mother tried tears. The judge asked for timestamps. They looked confused, like people who had lived their whole lives using charm as a shield, and suddenly discovered that legal systems care more about patterns than emotions. When the order was granted, my mother's face did not show heartbreak. It showed calculation, as if she was already planning the next angle. That expression was its own kind of closure. It confirmed there was no magic conversation that would turn them into different people. A few weeks after the wedding, my father's assistant reached out to me through Nadia. She wanted to apologize directly, but respected the no contact boundaries around my parents. She wrote a short message, acknowledging she had helped without verifying, and she explained that my father used his position to imply her job security depended on cooperation. Her note did not excuse her choices, but it added a layer of truth I had been avoiding. My parents did not only harm me, they harmed people around them by turning loyalty into obligation. I saved the note, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that control spreads outward unless someone stops it. On our first anniversary, Ethan and I went back to the restaurant where the rehearsal dinner happened, not to relive pain, but to mark the distance we had traveled. We sat at the same kind of table, ordered the same dessert, and talked about everything we built in a year: a home, routines, laughter, and the ability to trust our own reality. Ethan asked whether I ever imagined speaking to my parents again. I pictured it, honestly, and felt nothing. I realized then that boundaries are not walls meant to punish. They are fences that protect what matters. I did not need to forgive my parents to move forward. I only needed to stop letting their story define mine. The wedding day arrived with quiet intensity. I woke before dawn, not in panic, but in a calm that felt earned. My parents were not in the bridal suite. Their absence was a bruise and a relief. My closest friends were there. Aunt Marisol was there. Cousin Ivy was there. Ethan's mother was there, gentle and solid. The room felt like safety, not spectacle. We got married under an arch of white flowers, and the sky was a clean blue that looked like a promise. Ethan's vows were steady. Mine were honest. I spoke about choosing a life built on truth. When we walked back down the aisle, guests clapped without looking over their shoulders. The day belonged to us. 2 weeks later, the protective order hearing took place. My parents arrived dressed like victims. My mother carried tissues. My father carried a folder. The judge reviewed the timeline, the emails, the forged documents, the security footage, and witness statements. The judge asked my parents simple questions about the family protection team thread. They attempted explanations. The judge focused on patterns. The order was granted, barring contact with me, Ethan, our employers, and our vendors, and barring third-party communication. In the months that followed, consequences spread in quieter ways. My father faced a workplace compliance inquiry after his assistant described coercion and misuse of authority. My mother's nonprofit board demanded governance changes after sponsors raised questions. Volunteers began asking what else had been framed as protection. My parents hated questions more than punishment. Questions mean people no longer accept the script. A year passed. Ethan and I bought a small house and painted the walls ourselves. We built habits that did not involve my parents. The protective order remained in place, and my parents complied, not out of remorse, but out of fear of consequences. Sometimes the most honest apology people like them can offer is silence. Then my mother attempted one more move. A package arrived at our door containing my parents' wedding album and a note trying to rewrite everything, framing their sabotage as love and our boundaries as cruelty, asking for a meeting. I photographed the note and forwarded it to our attorney. The court extended the order and added a specific clause about gifts and indirect messaging. My mother learned something she never wanted to learn. Boundaries are not negotiations. They are lines with consequences. People ask whether I feel sad. I do. I grieve the parents I wanted, the parents I imagined might exist beneath the performance. But grief is not regret. Regret would mean I wish I had stayed quiet. I do not. Silence was the soil my parents used to grow control. When I stopped feeding it, their power shrank. If there is a moral to this story, it is not that love is perfect. Love is work. The moral is that love and ownership are not the same thing. When parents treat a child's marriage like a project to manage, They will sabotage it the moment they cannot control it. They will call sabotage protection, call fear wisdom, call your boundaries disrespect. The antidote is not proving you are worthy. The antidote is choosing the people who treat your life like yours. Document the truth. Share it with the right witnesses. Refuse to argue on the battlefield they built. Build your own. And when someone tries to burn your future to keep their grip on your past, let the evidence speak. Let the law hold the line. And let your peace be the thing you protect.